Daniel Hawthorne's hand froze on the nursery door handle. Laughter. Not just any laughter, his son's laughter. A sound he'd buried with his wife 8 months ago, a sound he'd convinced himself he'd never hear again. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he pressed his palm flat against the mahogany door. Through the crack, he could see movement, small shadows dancing across the afternoon light streaming through the window. A voice, soft and melodic, weaving words together like a spell. And then the little knight told the dragon, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here because I'm lost too." Daniel's jaw clenched. Who the hell is in my son's room? Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Whether you're watching from your cozy living room, on your morning commute, or winding down after a long day, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I love connecting with you all. And hey, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. These stories, they're meant to remind us all that life can surprise us in the most unexpected ways. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this one. Now, let's dive in. The Hawthorne estate sat like a fortress on the edge of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhood, 32 rooms of cold marble, bulletproof glass, and silence. So much silence. It had become Daniel's refuge after the accident, the place where he could control every variable, every entrance, every risk. Especially the risks to his son. 6-year-old Ethan Dawson Hawthorne hadn't spoken a complete sentence since the night his mother's car went off the bridge. The therapists called it selective mutism born from trauma. Daniel called it his greatest failure. He'd built a tech empire worth $12 billion, revolutionized artificial intelligence, and yet he couldn't reach the one person who mattered most. He'd tried everything. Child psychologists who spoke in soft tones and brought toys that Ethan wouldn't touch. Specialized tutors with credentials from institutions Daniel could buy twice over. Art therapists, music therapists, even a woman who claimed she could communicate through energy work, he'd fired her within an hour. Nothing worked. Ethan remained locked behind eyes that looked far older than 6, trapped in a world Daniel couldn't access no matter how much money he threw at the problem. So he'd established rules. Ironclad, non-negotiable rules. Rule number 1, no outsiders near his child. Ever. Which made the scene unfolding before him an impossibility. Daniel pushed the door open slowly, his Italian leather shoes silent on the Persian rug. The nursery, decorated in soft blues and whites, filled with toys Ethan never played with and books he never opened, had been transformed. Drawings covered the hardwood floor. Crude sketches made with what looked like charcoal and chalk, a castle, a dragon with kind eyes, a small figure holding a sword made of light. And in the center of this makeshift storybook world sat his son, cross-legged, barefoot, his small hands pressed together in delight. Beside him knelt a girl. She couldn't have been more than 17, maybe younger. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves down her back, still damp from the rain that had been falling all morning. She wore a jacket 3 sizes too large, the sleeves rolled up to reveal thin wrists, and jeans torn not from fashion but from wear. Her feet were bare, dirty, the kind of dirty that spoke of weeks without shelter. But her eyes, Daniel felt the air leave his lungs, her eyes were bright with something he hadn't seen in this house since the funeral. Hope. And what do you think the knight should say next? She asked Ethan, her voice gentle but not condescending, treating him like an equal rather than a broken thing to be fixed. Ethan's mouth opened. Daniel's heart stopped. Maybe. His son whispered, the word barely audible but there, real, maybe he should tell the dragon about his friend. The one who went away. The girl didn't flinch, didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply nodded, picked up a piece of charcoal, and began to draw. That's beautiful, Ethan. Because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones we need to tell the most. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket, his head of security, probably wondering why he hadn't responded to the silent alarm that must have triggered when he entered through the private entrance. His fingers trembled as rage and confusion and something else, something terrifyingly close to gratitude, warred inside his chest. This girl was trespassing. Breaking into his home. violating every protocol he'd established to keep his son safe from a world that had already taken too much. And yet, Ethan was talking. The girl must have sensed his presence because her hand stilled mid-drawing. She turned her head slowly, and when her eyes met his, Daniel saw something flicker across her face. Not fear, he'd expected fear. Recognition. As if she'd known all along that this moment would come, that she'd be caught, and she'd made peace with whatever consequences would follow. She rose to her feet in one fluid motion, placing herself between Daniel and Ethan. Protective. Ready. I can explain, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook at her sides. But please, don't scare him. He's had enough fear. He's had enough fear. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow because they were true, weren't they? He'd turned this mansion into a mausoleum, wrapped his son in security and silence, thinking he was protecting him. But maybe he'd only been protecting himself. Who are you? Daniel's voice came out harder than he intended, years of boardroom negotiations and hostile takeovers sharpening each syllable. How did you get into my house? The girl lifted her chin, a gesture of defiance that reminded him achingly of his late wife. My name is Sarah Connor. And your son, he needed someone who understood. Understood what? What it's like when the world tells you you're supposed to move on, but you don't know how. Behind her, Ethan had gone still, his small body tense. Daniel could see the shutdown beginning, the retreat back into silence that had become his son's only defense mechanism. He had a choice to make. Call security, have this girl removed, restore order to his carefully controlled world. It would be easy, logical, safe. Or, Daniel's gaze dropped to the drawings on the floor, to the story this homeless girl had created from nothing but charcoal and imagination. A story about a knight who was lost. A dragon who was lonely. Two broken things finding each other in the dark. His son had talked. For the first time in 8 months, Ethan had used his voice to share something real, something from the scared, grieving place he'd locked away from everyone. Even from his father. Mr. Hawthorne, Sarah said softly, and the use of his name, proper, respectful, as if she'd known exactly who he was all along, sent a chill down his spine. I know what you're thinking. I know what I look like, where I came from. I know you have every right to call the police. But your son is in there, somewhere behind all that hurt. And I think I know how to reach him. You have 30 seconds, Daniel heard himself say, his voice cold, detached, the tone he used when acquiring companies and destroying competitors. 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested for breaking and entering, child endangerment, and trespassing on private property. The girl's lips curved into the saddest smile Daniel had ever seen. Because, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, I used to be just like him. And no amount of money or security or rules saved me. But someone who understood. Someone who'd been in the dark too. She paused, and in that pause, Daniel felt the entire trajectory of his life shift, felt some invisible axis tilt. That person saved my life. Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows. Rain lashed against the glass like accusations. And in the terrible silence that followed Sarah Connor's words, Daniel Hawthorne, billionaire, genius, father, widower, realized he was about to make a decision that would either be the biggest mistake of his life or the only thing that mattered. His phone buzzed again. Security, demanding answers. His son watched him with those two old eyes, waiting to see if his father would send away the first person who'd made him feel less alone. And this impossible girl, this trespasser with dirty feet and secrets in her eyes, stood perfectly still, ready to accept whatever judgment came next. Daniel's finger hovered over the panic button on his phone. What do you do when the rules you created to protect your child are the same ones destroying him? Don't move, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Either of you. He turned toward the door, his decision made, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel stepped into the hallway and pulled the nursery door closed behind him, his hand still gripping the phone. Through the wood, He could hear Sarah's soft voice resume the story, giving Ethan something to focus on besides his father's retreat. Smart. She knew enough about traumatized children to understand that abrupt silence would trigger panic. Who is this girl? His head of security, James, appeared at the end of the corridor within seconds, his hand resting on the weapon holstered at his hip. Ex-military, loyal to a fault, James had been with the Hawthorne family since before Ethan was born. He'd been the one to identify his wife's body. The one to hold Daniel back when he tried to jump into the river after her. "Sir." James's voice was controlled, professional, but his eyes betrayed his concern. "We have an intruder. The girl from 3 weeks ago, she's back." 3 weeks. Daniel's blood ran cold. "You're telling me she's been on the property for 3 weeks and you're just now?" "No, sir." James moved closer, lowering his voice. 3 weeks ago, we caught her trying to scale the perimeter wall near the east garden. She claimed she was looking for shelter from the storm. We escorted her off the premises, drove her to a youth shelter downtown. Filed a report. He hesitated. "Sir, she's been flagged in the system. Runaway. No family. The shelters can't hold her, she keeps leaving." Daniel's mind raced through the implications. A homeless teenager, possibly mentally unstable, had not only breached his security once but had somehow returned, evaded every camera and sensor, and made her way into his son's room. It was impossible. The Hawthorne estate had security that rivaled government facilities. Facial recognition, motion sensors, heat mapping, ex-special forces guards rotating in 12-hour shifts. He'd designed it himself after the accident, every protocol specifically calibrated to prevent anyone unauthorized from getting within 100 feet of Ethan. "How?" Daniel demanded. "How did she get past everything?" James's jaw tightened. "We're reviewing the footage now, but sir, it's like she knew. Every blind spot, every camera rotation, every guard rotation. She moved through the estate like she'd studied it for months. That's not possible unless," Daniel stopped, his blood chilling further. "Unless someone gave her the information. We're investigating all staff, but sir, with respect, that's not the immediate problem." James glanced at the nursery door. "The problem is she's in there with your son right now. We need to extract her, get police involved, and—" "No." The word came out harder than Daniel intended. James blinked, clearly thrown. "Sir." Daniel pressed his fingers against his temples, fighting the migraine building behind his eyes. Every logical part of his brain screamed that James was right. Remove the threat. Secure the asset. That's how he'd survived in business, how he'd built his empire, by eliminating variables he couldn't control. But Ethan's laughter still echoed in his ears. Maybe he should tell the dragon about his friend. The one who went away. His son's voice. Quiet, hesitant, but alive. More alive than he'd been since the day they'd lowered his mother into the ground. "Give me 10 minutes, Daniel said finally. "Keep the exits covered, but don't enter that room unless I signal." "Understood." James looked like he wanted to argue, but decades of military discipline won out. 10 minutes. "But sir, if she makes any move toward the boy." "She won't." Daniel surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. "I don't know how I know that, but I do." James nodded curtly and retreated down the hallway, speaking quietly into his earpiece. Daniel took a breath, steadied himself, and opened the nursery door. The scene had shifted. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor now, and Ethan had moved closer to her, their heads bent together over a new drawing she was creating. The charcoal in her hand moved with surprising skill, sketching out what looked like a garden. "This is where the night went when he needed to think," Sarah was saying. It was the only place where the noise in his head got quiet enough that he could hear his own heart. Ethan pointed at the drawing. "Can I make one? A place like that?" "Of course. Everyone needs a place like that. Where's yours?" The boy went silent for a moment, then whispered, "I used to go to Mama's studio. She painted there. It smelled like her." Daniel's throat constricted. Catherine's art studio in the East Wing, he'd locked it the day after the funeral, unable to face the half-finished canvases and the scent of jasmine perfume that still lingered in the air. Sarah didn't flinch at the mention of Ethan's mother. She simply nodded and began adding details to her drawing, flowers that might have been jasmine. Then maybe, she said softly, maybe the knight needs to visit that place again. To tell his mama's heart that he still remembers. You think she can hear? I think the people we love never really leave us. They live in here. She tapped Ethan's chest gently. Every story they told us, every time they made us laugh, every moment they made us feel safe, that's all still there. The dragon taught the knight that. Daniel cleared his throat, and both of them looked up. But where Ethan's face showed worry, the familiar retreat beginning, Sarah's expression remained calm. Knowing. Ethan, Daniel said, keeping his voice as gentle as he could manage, why don't you go wash up for dinner? Mrs. Chen is making your favorite. His son glanced between them, clearly torn. Sarah gave him a small smile. It's okay. Go ahead. We'll finish the story later. Promise. Ethan's voice was so small, so fragile. I promise. It was a lie, of course. Daniel would make sure this girl was off his property within the hour, promise or not. But Ethan nodded, seemed to accept it, and padded out of the room on silent feet. The moment the door closed behind him, the air in the nursery changed. Daniel moved to the window, putting distance between himself and this stranger who'd somehow cracked open his son's shell. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and the Seattle skyline stretched grey and endless beyond the estate walls. You're very good at this, he said quietly. Making promises you can't keep. I don't make promises I can't keep, Mr. Hawthorne. Sarah's voice had changed too, still soft, but with an edge of steel underneath. I said we'd finish the story. I didn't say when or where. He turned to face her. Up close, in the better light, he could see more details. The shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The way her clothes, though dirty, were arranged with care, the jacket buttoned despite missing 2 buttons, the jeans rolled at the cuffs to keep them from dragging. Pride, even in poverty. And something else. A bruise, fading but visible, along her left cheekbone. How old are you, Sarah Connor? The name felt strange on his tongue, too familiar for a stranger, too loaded with pop culture references that seemed absurdly out of place in this moment. Old enough to know when someone's in pain. She met his gaze steadily. Young enough to remember what it feels like when no one sees you. That's not an answer. Neither is most of what you tell yourself at night, I'd bet. She tilted her head, studying him with unsettling intensity. You want to know how I got in here? Why I came back? What I want from you? All of the above. Sarah stood slowly, and Daniel noticed she moved like someone accustomed to making themselves small, unthreatening. But there was strength there too, coiled tight, ready to spring if needed. I got in because I'm good at being invisible. It's a skill you learn fast on the streets, how to move through spaces like you're not really there, how to read patterns and slip between them. She gestured at the drawings on the floor. I came back because 3 weeks ago, when your security found me on the wall, I saw him. Your son. He was standing at this window, looking out at the rain, and I saw something in his face that I recognized. And what was that? Someone who'd stopped believing anyone could see him too. The words hit Daniel like a fist to the sternum. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that he saw Ethan every day, that he'd done everything humanly possible to reach his son. But the truth was uglier than that, wasn't it? He'd hired people to see Ethan, paid experts to reach Ethan, bought solutions and implemented protocols and created systems. But had he, Daniel himself, the father, actually looked at his son and seen him? Or had he been too afraid of what he'd find reflected there? What do you want? The question came out rougher than intended. Money. Is this some elaborate con? Because if you think you can use my son to... I don't want your money. Sarah's voice cut through his accusation like a knife. I want to help him. That's all. Why? You don't know him. You don't know us. No, she agreed. But I know what it's like to drown in a house full of people who don't know how to reach you. I know what it's like to scream in silence because your voice stopped meaning anything. And I know, her voice cracked, just slightly. I know what it's like when someone finally hears you. Really hears you. It changes everything. Daniel studied her face, looking for the angle, the manipulation. He'd dealt with corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, people who tried to use his family for leverage. He could spot a liar from across a boardroom. But this girl, this impossible, infuriating, heartbreaking girl, was telling the truth. You said someone saved you, Daniel said slowly. Who? Sarah's eyes darkened with something that looked like grief. A teacher. Mrs. Rivera. She taught English at the group home I was at when I was 12. She never pushed me to talk about what happened before, never tried to fix me. She read to us. Stories about heroes who were broken and monsters who were misunderstood and people who found families in the strangest places. What happened to her? Cancer. 2 years ago. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to a small pendant around her neck, a tiny book charm on a chain that had seen better days. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said, the stories don't end with us, Sarah. We pass them on. Find someone who needs to hear them, and don't let them stay lost. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain against glass and Daniel's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. This was insane. Everything about this situation violated every principle he'd built his life on. You didn't trust strangers. You didn't let unknown variables into your inner circle. You certainly didn't let homeless teenagers with mysterious pasts anywhere near your traumatized child. And yet, Ethan had talked. How long have you been on the streets? Daniel asked. 3 years. Since I aged out of the foster system. You're 17, 18 in 2 months. Not that it matters much. Family, dead. Or gone. Same difference. The answers came flat, practiced, like she'd given them 1,000 times to social workers and shelter staff and people who asked because protocol demanded it, not because they cared. Daniel moved to the chair by Ethan's reading nook, the chair Catherine used to sit in when she'd read bedtime stories, back when the world made sense. He sank into it, suddenly exhausted. My wife died 8 months ago, he heard himself say. Car accident. Black ice on the bridge, another driver who'd been drinking. She died on impact. They told me she didn't suffer. He laughed bitterly. Like that's supposed to make it better. Sarah lowered herself back to the floor, sitting among her drawings. Waiting. Ethan was in the car. Back seat. He saw everything. They said it's a miracle he survived with just a broken arm and some bruising. But I think, Daniel's voice broke. I think part of him died with her. The part that knew how to be a child. How to feel safe. And you've been trying to protect what's left. Yes. The admission cost him something. I thought if I could just control the environment, eliminate the threats, keep him safe from anything that might hurt him more. You could stop him from feeling pain. Yes. But pain isn't the problem, Mr. Hawthorne. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Feeling it alone is. The words settled into the room like snow, soft but undeniable. Daniel looked at this girl, this stranger who'd broken into his home, who had no right to be here, who by all logic should terrify him, and felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been frozen since the day he'd identified his wife's body. I don't know what to do, he admitted quietly. I don't know how to reach him. And I'm terrified that if I try and fail again, I'll lose him completely. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you won't fail. Because you're not trying to fix him anymore. You're trying to see him. That's different. Is it? It's everything. Daniel's phone buzzed. James, requesting an update. Decision time. He could end this now. Have Sarah removed, Get Ethan back into his routine of private tutors and controlled environments. It would be safe, predictable, empty. Or he could do something he hadn't done since Catherine died. He could take a risk. I need to know everything, Daniel said finally. Your full name. Where you've been. How you learned to breach my security. And I need the truth about what happened to you, why you're on the streets, who gave you that bruise, and what you're really running from. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Why? Because if, and this is a massive if, I decide to let you anywhere near my son again, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. No secrets. No games. And if I tell you, and you don't like what you hear, then you leave, and we never speak of this again. Sarah considered this, her fingers tracing one of the charcoal drawings, the knight and the dragon, meeting in the dark. Okay, she said finally. But fair warning, Mr. Hawthorne. The truth is messy. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Try me. And so, in the fading afternoon light of his son's nursery, surrounded by drawings that told stories of loss and hope, Sarah Connor began to speak. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers twisting together in her lap, knuckles white with tension. My real name is Sarah Elizabeth Connor. I was born in Portland, and until I was 14, I had a normal life. A mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. A tiny apartment that always smelled like her lavender candles. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Daniel listened, his body perfectly still, every sense attuned to the words she was choosing and the ones she was avoiding. Then Mom got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She lasted 6 months. Sarah's eyes fixed on something beyond the window, beyond the rain, beyond the present. She made me promise I'd go to my aunt in Seattle if anything happened to her. Aunt Linda. Mom's younger sister. And did you? Yes. The single word carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. That's when everything went wrong. Sarah stood abruptly, moving to the window where Ethan had stood 3 weeks ago. Where she'd first seen the boy who would change everything. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly, translucent. Aunt Linda was married to a man named Marcus, she caught herself, jaw tightening. Actually, no. Not Marcus. His name was Vincent. Vincent Corleone. The name came out like poison. He worked in commercial real estate, seemed normal on the surface. Aunt Linda thought she'd won the lottery with him. Daniel's instincts, honed from years of due diligence and corporate investigations, began firing warning signals. What did Vincent do? At first, nothing. He was nice, even. Gave me my own room, paid for new clothes, enrolled me in a good school. I thought maybe Mom had been right, that Linda would take care of me. Sarah's voice dropped. Then about 3 months in, Aunt Linda had to go to Portland for a week to settle Mom's estate. And Vincent showed me who he really was. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He never touched me, Sarah said quickly, as if sensing Daniel's thoughts going to the darkest places. But he made it clear he wanted to. Started with comments about how I was growing up, how pretty I was becoming. Then he started coming into my room at night, just standing there in the doorway, watching me sleep. I'd wake up and he'd be there, smiling. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Did you tell your aunt? I tried. Sarah's laugh was bitter. She didn't want to hear it. Told me I was confused, grieving, imagining things. Vincent was her second chance at happiness after a string of failed relationships. She'd convinced herself he was perfect. And I was just the troubled foster kid who'd rather live on the streets than accept help. So you ran. Not at first. I tried to tough it out, thought maybe if I just stayed out of his way until I turned 18, I could leave legally, cleanly. But Vincent got bolder. Started cornering me in the house when Linda wasn't home, blocking doorways, touching my hair, my shoulder. Always stopping just short of anything I could prove. Sarah turned from the window, and Daniel saw the haunted look in her eyes, the look of someone who'd learned too young that the monsters don't always look like monsters. The night I left, He came into my room at 2 in the morning. He was drunk, and he said," her voice wavered. "He said Linda was starting to suspect something, that she'd been asking questions. He said if I didn't keep my mouth shut and start being grateful for everything he'd done for me, he'd make sure I ended up in a group home where no one would believe anything I said." "But you didn't keep quiet." "No." I grabbed the lamp off my nightstand and swung it at him. Caught him across the face. "That's where this came from." She touched the fading bruise on her cheek. He hit me back, hard enough that I saw stars. But it gave me enough time to grab my backpack and run. Daniel's mind raced through the implications. That was 3 years ago. Yes. I've been moving ever since. Stayed in shelters when I could, avoided ones where Vincent might look for me. Changed my appearance, learned to stay invisible. The foster system aged me out at 17, no family, no resources, no high school diploma because I couldn't stay in one place long enough to finish. And 3 weeks ago, Sarah met his eyes directly. 3 weeks ago, I made a mistake. I used a computer at the library to check on Aunt Linda, see if maybe she'd left Vincent, if maybe things had changed. But I forgot to clear my search history, and someone must have flagged my IP address. Because 2 days later, I saw him. The air in the nursery seemed to freeze. "Vincent." Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. Walking through Pike Place Market like he owned the city. I was getting food from a church outreach van, and I looked up and there he was, 50 feet away. He was with another man, showing him something on his phone. And then, Sarah's composure finally cracked, fear bleeding through. He looked right at me. Right at me. And he smiled. "Did he approach you?" "No. But he knows I'm here, in Seattle. And if he knows that, he'll be looking." She wrapped her arms around herself. That's when I decided I needed to find somewhere safe, even if just for a night. I'd been casing high-security properties, places with walls and guards that would keep people like Vincent out. "And you found mine?" "Yes. I wasn't going to come inside, I swear. I just wanted to sleep somewhere safe, maybe in one of your garden sheds. But that first night, when your guards found me, I saw Ethan at the window. And I recognized him." "Recognized him how?" "The same way you recognize your own face in an old photograph." Sarah's voice turned fierce. "He was me, 3 years ago. Locked in a beautiful house, surrounded by people who couldn't reach him, drowning in silence while everyone tried to fix him with the wrong tools." Daniel stood slowly, his mind synthesizing everything she told him. The pattern recognition that had made him billions in tech was screaming at him now, connecting dots, seeing angles. "You studied my security for 3 weeks, he said. "Learned the patterns, the rotations, the blind spots. You could have used that information to rob me, to steal something valuable." "Yes. But instead, you came back for my son." "Yes." "Why?" Sarah's eyes blazed with something Daniel hadn't seen in anyone's face since Catherine died, absolute, unshakable conviction. "Because I made a promise to Mrs. Rivera. And because I saw Ethan standing at that window, and I knew that if someone didn't reach him soon, he'd disappear completely. The way I almost did." She took a step toward Daniel, fearless now. "You can check my story. Call the Portland police, contact Aunt Linda, pull Vincent Corleone's records. It's all true. Every word. And yes, I broke into your house. Yes, I violated your trust. But I came back for one reason only, to give your son what someone once gave me. A chance to be seen." The nursery door burst open. James stood in the doorway, his face grim, weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. "Sir, we have a situation. There's a man at the main gate claiming to be this girl's legal guardian. He has documentation, a guardianship order from Portland, Oregon. He's demanding we release her to his custody." Sarah's face went white. "No. No, no, no. Vincent Corleone," James continued. "He's been searching for her for 3 years. Says she's a runaway, mentally unstable, prone to making false accusations. He has police with him, sir. They're saying if we don't produce her, they'll get a warrant and search the property. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He looked at Sarah, saw the terror in her eyes, real, primal terror that couldn't be faked. Then he looked at James, at the weapon in his hand, at the choice crystallizing before him with brutal clarity. He could hand Sarah over to the authorities. Let them sort out the truth from the lies. Protect his son from getting entangled in whatever darkness surrounded this girl. It would be clean, legal, safe. Or he could believe her. Trust a homeless teenager he'd known for less than an hour over legal documentation and uniformed police officers. Risk everything he'd built, his reputation, his security, his son's stability, on the word of a girl who'd already proven she could lie, manipulate, and break into places she didn't belong. Sir, James pressed. They're requesting an answer. Daniel looked at Sarah, really looked at her. Saw past the dirty clothes and the bruises and the fear. Saw the same thing Catherine used to see in the shelter dogs she'd bring home, the strays she'd nurse back to health despite his protests that they were unpredictable, potentially dangerous. The best ones are always the ones nobody else wanted, Catherine had told him once. Because they know what it's like to be invisible. And they never forget the person who finally sees them. His wife had been right about the dogs. Maybe she'd be right about this too. Daniel turned to James, his decision made in the space between heartbeats. Tell them no. Sir. Tell them we have no one matching that description on the property. Tell them they're welcome to apply for a warrant, but they'll find my lawyers have already filed a restraining order against Vincent Corleone on behalf of Sarah Connor, who is now under the protection of this household as a resident guest. Sarah's breath caught. What are you? James, also call my legal team. I want a full background check on Vincent Corleone run within the hour, criminal history, employment records, everything. And I want protection orders filed in every county between here and Portland. Daniel's voice had shifted into the tone that had built empires and destroyed competitors. If this man so much as sets foot on my property, I want him arrested for trespassing and harassment. Mr. Hawthorne, James said carefully, do you understand what you're doing? If her story doesn't check out, then I'll deal with the consequences. Daniel looked at Sarah, saw tears streaming down her face. But I don't think it won't. Do you? James studied Sarah for a long moment, his decades of military and security experience reading body language, micro-expressions, tells that would reveal deception. Finally, he shook his head. No, sir. I don't. Then we have our answer. Daniel moved toward the door, toward James, toward the decision that would change all their lives. Get it done. And James, no one gets near this girl or my son without going through me first. No one. James holstered his weapon and nodded once, sharp and final. Yes, sir. He disappeared down the hallway, already speaking urgently into his phone. The door clicked shut, leaving Daniel and Sarah alone in the sudden silence. Sarah was shaking now, her whole body trembling with shock and relief and disbelief. Why, she whispered. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't know if I'm telling the truth. I could be playing you, I could be. You could be, Daniel agreed. But you're not. How do you know? Daniel thought of Ethan's laughter. Of the way Sarah had positioned herself between his son and any perceived threat. Of the drawings on the floor that showed more understanding of childhood trauma than a dozen expensive therapists had managed to provide. Because my wife used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when the world is watching, he said quietly. It's what they do when they think no one can see them at all. And what you did, Sarah, when you thought no one was watching, was risk everything to help a child you didn't know. Fresh tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. What happens now? Now? Daniel glanced at the drawings, at the story she'd started to tell his son. Now we finish what you started. You help Ethan find his voice again. And I help you get your life back. Deal? Sarah stared at him like he'd just offered her the world. Which, in a way, he had. Deal, she whispered. Outside, thunder rumbled. But inside the nursery, something else was building, something neither of them fully understood yet. Not quite trust, not quite alliance, but the fragile beginning of something that might, eventually, become family. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from his legal team confirming they were mobilizing. Below it, another message from James. Guards report Corleone leaving the gate. He's not happy. Recommend increased security protocols. He'll come back, Sarah said, reading Daniel's expression. Yes, Daniel agreed. But when he does, he'll find that you're not alone anymore. And that changes everything. A soft knock at the door. Ethan peeked in, his small face worried. Dad. Mrs. Chen says dinner's ready. Is Sarah staying? Daniel looked at Sarah, saw the question in her eyes, the desperate hope warring with disbelief that this could be real. Yes, he told his son. Sarah's staying. Ethan's face broke into the first genuine smile Daniel had seen in 8 months. Can she sit next to me? If she wants to. Sarah knelt down to Ethan's level, her voice gentle. I'd be honored. As the three of them left the nursery, the billionaire, the homeless girl, and the silent boy who was learning to speak again, none of them could have known that the real story was just beginning. Or that the darkness gathering outside the gates would test every promise they just made. But for now, in this moment, there was dinner, and warmth, and the first fragile threads of hope beginning to weave themselves into something stronger than any security system money could buy. Something that looked almost like family. 3 weeks passed like a dream Sarah kept waiting to wake from. The guest suite Daniel provided had its own bathroom, a bed softer than clouds, and windows that overlooked the garden where jasmine grew wild. Every morning, she'd wake in panic, convinced it was all temporary, that today would be the day Daniel changed his mind. But he never did. Instead, he enrolled her in online classes to finish her GED. Bought her clothes that actually fit. Set up a trust fund she couldn't touch until she turned 21, for college or whatever you choose. He asked nothing in return except that she continue working with Ethan. And Ethan was blooming. The boy who hadn't spoken for 8 months now narrated entire stories, asked questions, laughed at Sarah's terrible jokes. They'd moved their sessions to Catherine's art studio. Daniel had unlocked it at Ethan's request and filled it with new drawings, new stories, new life. But it was the moments between the structured lessons that Sarah treasured most. The way Ethan would absently lean against her while they read. How he'd started calling her my Sarah, possessive and proud. The morning he'd presented her with a drawing of 3 figures, a tall man, a small boy, and a girl with wild hair labeled my family. Daniel had found that drawing on the refrigerator and stared at it for 10 minutes without speaking. Things between them had shifted too, in ways Sarah didn't have words for. The way his eyes would linger when she laughed. How his hand would brush hers when passing Ethan's schoolwork, the touch lasting a heartbeat too long. The night she'd found him in the library at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, and they'd talked until dawn about loss and fear and the strange mercy of starting over. I never expected this, Daniel had admitted as the sun rose over Seattle. Any of this. Expected what? To feel alive again. Sarah's heart had stuttered in her chest, but she'd only smiled and said, life has a way of surprising us. Now, watching Daniel help Ethan with a puzzle in the living room, Sarah felt something terrifying and wonderful unfurl in her chest. This wasn't just gratitude or safety or the relief of having a roof over her head. This was home. And that made it all the more devastating when everything shattered. It happened on a Tuesday. Sarah was in the art studio with Ethan, working on a mural of the Knight and Dragon story they'd completed. The boy was singing, actually singing, when James appeared in the doorway, his face grave. Sarah. Mr. Hawthorne needs you in his office. Now. The tone sent ice through her veins. She looked at Ethan, forced a smile. Keep working on the dragon's wings. I'll be right back. But she knew. Somehow, she knew. Daniel stood by his desk, his posture rigid. On the screen behind him was a news broadcast. Tech billionaire Daniel Hawthorne under investigation for harboring runaway minor. Vincent went to the press, Daniel said quietly. He's claiming I manipulated you, that you're being held against your will. He's got doctors saying you have a history of mental instability, falsifying stories. My lawyers are being bombarded with subpoenas. Sarah's world tilted. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I never meant. Stop. He crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. This isn't your fault. But Sarah, they're going to dig into everything. Your past, my decision to shelter you, the legality of the guardianship claim. This could destroy my company, my reputation. Then I'll leave. The words tore from her throat. I'll go to the police, tell them the truth, that you were only helping. No. Daniel's voice was steel. You're not going anywhere near Vincent. But there's another option. He pulled out a document. Adoption papers. If I legally adopt you before the hearing next week, Vincent's guardianship claim becomes void. You'd be my daughter, fully protected under my custody. He couldn't touch you. Sarah stared at the papers, then at Daniel, seeing the cost written in every line of his face. You do that. Risk everything for me. I already have. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. The question is, do you trust me enough to let me? Before Sarah could answer, a crash echoed from the art studio. They ran. Ethan stood in the center of the room, his small body shaking, tears streaming down his face. The mural was destroyed, slashed with scissors, paint dripping like blood. They're going to take her away, he sobbed. Just like Mama. Everyone I love goes away. Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling him close. No, baby. No. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. His voice was so small, so broken. She looked up at Daniel, saw the answer in his eyes. I promise. That night, after Ethan finally fell asleep between them on the couch, Daniel signed the adoption papers. Sarah's hand trembled as she added her signature beneath his. This makes it real, she whispered. It was always real, Daniel replied. From the moment you walked into that nursery and gave my son his voice back. From the moment you made me remember what it means to see someone. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something there that made her breath catch, not gratitude or duty, but something deeper. Something that looked like the beginning of love. The hearing was brutal. Vincent showed up in an expensive suit, playing the concerned guardian. But Daniel's lawyers demolished him piece by piece, the restraining orders Sarah had never known existed, the testimony from Aunt Linda who finally admitted what she'd refused to see, the evidence of Vincent's predatory pattern with other young girls. When the judge declared the adoption legal and binding, Sarah felt 3 years of running finally end. Outside the courthouse, Vincent tried one last time, grabbing Sarah's arm. You think you've won? You're nothing but trash that Billionaire took pity on. Daniel stepped between them, his voice deadly calm. Touch my daughter again, and I'll bury you so deep you'll never see daylight. Are we clear? Vincent released her, his face twisted with rage, but he left. Finally, permanently, gone. In the car ride home, Ethan held Sarah's hand. Does this mean you're really my sister now? Yes, Sarah said, tears streaming freely. Forever. Good. He smiled, the same smile that had started everything. Because I love you. I love you too, little knight. Daniel's hand found Sarah's in the back seat, squeezed gently. And though neither of them said it aloud yet, Sarah felt the truth settling into her bones like a benediction. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest places, with a girl who had nothing, a boy who had lost everything, and a man who learned that the greatest wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the family you choose to build. 3 months later, Sarah started college with a full scholarship Daniel definitely didn't arrange. Ethan thrived in school, his silence now just a distant memory. And Daniel learned to laugh again, to dream again, to love again. The art studio became their gathering place, filled with stories and laughter and life. And on the wall, carefully restored, hung the mural of a knight, a dragon, and a girl who saved them both. And there you have it, friends, a story about finding family in the most unexpected places, about second chances, and about the power of simply being seen. What did you think? Which moment hit you hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their story isn't over yet. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the beautiful mess of being human. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay kind, and remember, you never know when one moment of compassion might change everything.